Hello and welcome once again. I'm Michael Ballard and I'm your host, and today we have Michelle who's going to share some big stuff that she dealt with and what she did about it. So the purpose of the show, as you know, is resiliency, and we all have our own journey and we all face our own stuff our own ways. So I'm asking you if you could share one of the big things or more of big stuff you faced, and I call it big stuff because it to me feels a little safer. Talk about some of the things we've been through, and name it sometimes is even scarier, but by calling it big stuff, whether it's chronic illness, acute illness, accidents, all the things humans face, big stuff to me is safe, because then I can talk to 6-year-olds and 96-year-olds.
Well, that's good, because big stuff is a safe kind of way of putting it. And yeah, my big stuff lasted for something close to 45 years of my life.
Wow.
And that big stuff was gender dysphoria.
Okay.
So gender dysphoria being an incompatibility, if you will, between your physical form and your sense of identity. And oftentimes that then manifests into an altered and non-authentic gender expression. So this is quite distinct from sexual orientation. So when we talk about gender, gender is that sense of self. Who do I feel that I am? How do I feel that I fit into society?
Right. Okay.
And, you know, in my case, very clearly at the time, not so clear now, very clearly at the time, I was born a male. And doctors, as I was born, held me up, investigated certain parts of my anatomy, and said, yes, congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Emson, you have a healthy, bouncy baby boy. What they were unable to ascertain at that point was my sense of self,
right,
because that exists in here between the ears.
Yes.
And that does not have to necessarily correlate with any other aspect of our physicality. Our physicality, our bodies, are merely the carriage by which we carry our essence.
Absolutely.
Okay?
That's a real key point about resiliency.
Well, the resiliency really comes from how you deal with that incongruity, right? Because to be born that way and then to be raised apparently as a boy, but then to become aware of yourself, that we reach an age where we become consciously aware of ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And when we realize that our awareness, our self-awareness, differs from other people's apparent awareness of you or interpretation of you, and you don't understand that difference or why that difference exists or why you feel differently than you're expected to feel, right? And it's all about expectations.
Yes.
So if you imagine for a moment growing up in the late 60s, early 70s in suburban England, in an environment where as supportive as it was, in as much as I was always clothed and I was always fed and I was always housed. I come from a broken family. My mom left when I was 4, and my baby sister, 2 years younger than me, was 2. So there was something missing, right. Around our lives. Coupled with a completely different set of core family values and attitudes. So children were to be seen and not heard. You don't speak until you're spoken to, right? This kind of rhetoric, very familiar to anybody of our kind of age group. And so when you're in that kind of environment, and yet at the same time you're experiencing this conflict, what do you do about it? There was no internet. There were no books on the subject that were accessible to prepubescent child, there were no magazine articles, newspaper articles. We had 2 channels of TV, and they didn't cover it. Okay. So where's your frame of reference? Right? And so what happens is you internalize it. And I'm generalizing here.
Certainly.
This is my lived experience. Yes. But from speaking with a large number of other trans people, the lived experience is very similar. And it's similar by generation. And so in my generation, you internalize it. And what happens is that you become aware of your difference. You fail to understand it. You fail to be able to articulate it. So it becomes the elephant in the room. It becomes something that is unspeakable because it's just too disgusting to contemplate. It's too dirty to share. You are spoiled. You are somehow broken, and you can't share it with anybody, so all you can do is hide it. And hiding it starts off relatively easily, but as each day goes by, hiding it becomes harder and harder and harder.
It's almost like an internal pressure building up.
Well, it becomes bigger and bigger and bigger, and it needs more energy and more effort to hide it.
Well, I have a saying for you that typifies with those of us that have had chronic illness issues, because sometimes we pretend they don't exist, that they get worse because we're not managing it, because we refuse to admit that we're broken or defective. So what you repress can make you regress.
Yes.
It's the only quote I have that I know is mine. But I've met people who for 30 years have ignored their chronic illness at great peril to their long-term and intermediate-term quality of life and health. So it's
and you're absolutely right. To repress, to regress. And what happens is you continue to repress. You continue to invest energy in hiding this dirty secret. And the longer you keep it, the harder it is to reveal. Somebody whose name escapes me at this point, but this one is not mine, refers to a closet as a difficult conversation yet to be had. And the longer you repress that conversation, the harder it is to have it. And in my case, it took over 40 years, close to 45 years of repression, before the pressure cooker really exploded. And it became an imperative that I had to explore this. And I was in such deep, deep, deep denial for all those years, right? The longer you repress it, then the more and deeper into denial you get with it.
Yes. To
the point where, I didn't even read on the subject of gender diversity until 2007.
Wow.
And I was born in 61, so that's a long time. That's a long time of living in this ambiguity, in this duality, of having this sense of self and essence, and of not belonging in the community to which I was socialized, that is, the male community.
Sure,
right?
Sure.
So then comes a point where it does truly become an imperative. And I should point out a couple of things here. And it's about choice.
Yes.
And, the body within which we were born is not a choice. We don't choose that. Nobody chooses that. That's a gift we're granted. The sense of identity is not a choice. We're born with that too.
Yes.
Right? We don't at some point say, I think. Yeah. No, we don't do that, right? Our sense of expression of our identity is a choice. That is something we can choose to do. And so in my case, growing up, I chose to conform in my expression because I couldn't articulate how I was feeling. I couldn't articulate, and it's only in hindsight, and isn't hindsight wonderful, right?
Yes.
It's only in hindsight and a lot of retrospection that I can look back and describe to you how I felt back then. I couldn't have been so articulate at the time.
Right.
I didn't have the vocabulary, I didn't have the understanding.
Well, with time has come more perspective,
Yes.
With time, increased vocabulary. In time, that 30,000 foot point of view, because you have more of you to look at.
Mm-hmm.
Life richly lived, but not lived to the way in which you want it to be.
Not lived fully, yes.
Yes.
So when it comes to choices, the choice I made in 2008 was to do something about it.
Okay.
And that was to talk to somebody for the very first time. For the very first time, I spoke to a professional psychotherapist in 2008 for the first time. I shared this sense of conflict that I had. And thus began a 6-year journey of emergence.
Mm-hmm.
The first 3 years of which was spent unraveling and searching for a cure. And by the way, there isn't one.
No.
But nevertheless, by this time, the stakes are now high, right? The stakes are that I have a job, a 6-figure career. I have a wife. I have 2 children, stepchildren. I have 6 grandchildren. I have a home. I have a community. And, although during a lot of that time I was very introverted, I was dealing with a lot of depression. And so, I was nowhere near as gregarious as I am today. But that's because I wasn't living authentically.
Right.
So, but nevertheless, I had all of this stuff, right? And hence I had a lot to lose.
Mm-hmm.
So when it came time to choose, when it came time to try and deal with this, there was a lot of resistance to change.
Oh, but yes, because as you said, you had a lot of things going on that you'd invested time and effort and love and emotions to.
Absolutely. Right? And so for the first 3 years was truly spent trying to find a cure. How could I fix me? Right? So that I could maintain the status quo around everything that I had built.
Mm-hmm.
Because at that time I placed an incredible amount of value on it. Not just the material things, but the immaterial, the relationships, right?
Yes.
The people in my life. And they mattered to me, and they still do. So it was a very hard decision to make. And it was a decision that had to be made not just for me, but I needed to take them into some consideration.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, survival and the option, the combination of depression as well as gender dysphoria makes for a potent mix. And frequently people that are going through these kinds of pressures, on the path hopefully to developing resiliency, but in the meantime experience deep, dark depression and stress.
Yes.
And very oftentimes will either attempt or succeed in suicide and taking their own lives.
Okay.
So the mortality rate in the trans population is very high relative to the general population. Very high. And that can be for a number of reasons, not least of which the one I've described, that one of having to make a choice between meeting your own needs and coming out of yourself and becoming your authentic true self, which you've hidden for all these years, versus maintaining the status quo in order to maintain all of what you've built. And as hard as it was, I knew that I needed to follow that path of authenticity. I needed to let go of all of the constraints that held me back from that. And unfortunately, that meant letting go of my family, letting go of my home, letting go of a career, because it's a very hard journey, period, very hard to bring people along on this journey with you.
But you didn't do it lightly. I heard you say you took 3 years.
I took 3 years of pursuing all sorts of different ways of dealing with this, right?
Well, you learned about options.
Totally learned about options, learned about some very I can only describe as hideous treatment regimens that are available out there that have really proved to be unpopular. I read and consumed an incredible amount of information on the subject, something I'd denied myself all of my life.
You were catching up.
I was catching up. I needed to understand what I was dealing with. Once I'd finally released it, once I'd finally spoken those words, now I just had this incredible thirst for knowledge, and I needed to understand it. And I needed to understand, you know, sciences and the medical best knowledge to date of, you know, of what this is, how it is, what do we know about it today, and what really is the most successful path forward, right?
And what a path forward.
Yes, what a path forward, but at the same time not, right?
Okay.
And the reason I say that is I come back to that choice. What did I choose? Right? When did I become a woman? Well, actually, I was born a woman. It's just that I didn't express it, therefore nobody else saw it. And I worked very hard to hide it because it didn't fit with my vehicle, which is my body, nor did it fit with society's expectation of how that body was supposed to present itself to the world.
Right.
Okay?
So when I work with youth at risk, I always say the gift wrap is interesting, but that's only a small piece of who you might be.
Yes, it is.
It's the gifts inside. It's the values and the vision and the feelings and the emotional intelligence you bring to the situation that helps define who you are.
Yes.
So you're saying it in a totally different way, but I believe
it's the same thing.
We're in total alignment with
We're
this.
total alignment.
Yes.
So what was the big change for me? Well, the big change was changing the way I show up in the world.
Okay.
Right? So there was some undoing to be done because naturally I had been socialized and out of choice maintained that socialization as a man. So that meant adopting certain behaviors, certain attitudes, certain beliefs and values.
Physical postures.
Physical postures, right? All sorts of things. And you know, I was a chameleon. So all of that time, I would be whatever you wanted me to be, whoever you were, right?
Yes.
So whether you were my boss, my father, my mother, my partner, whoever you were, because I couldn't release myself, I would be whatever you wanted me to be or needed me to be in order to be accepted. And I think part of that need for acceptance came out of the loss of my mother, right at such a young age. So I was very much always looking for acceptance. I was looking for acceptance from my father for many, many years. And from other people around me. I needed to belong.
Yes.
And yet I didn't belong.
In a very big way.
In a very big way.
And then you're holding it in. So as you said, it
Totally.
takes a lot of work to keep the genie in the bottle.
Huge amount of energy.
And it's exhausting.
Yes, it is.
Not just intellectually, but emotionally, I would think.
Yes.
Because you weren't being authentic to who you were.
No.
Wow. But now,
Well, so now now I am. Now I am wholly authentic. Now I am truly me. It's no holds barred. There were a couple of things that I learned along the way which have been lifesavers for me. And the very first one was what other people think of you is none of your business. So I heard this from Dr. David Burns, who's an expert in cognitive behavioral therapy.
okay.
And that was a path that I chose in order to try and combat my depression, which, by the way, had been misdiagnosed. I found out only a couple of months ago. But I followed the path of CBT, knowing that how I felt was directly related to what I think, right? So if I change what I think about something, I'm going to change how I feel about it.
Big, big, big. If that's the one thing you take away from this interview, that's the one thing to take away. I see it with, again, in my world, I hang around with people who come to me for some ideas and coaching on chronic illness and acute illness, and I always say, I lived it several ways, but it doesn't mean I'm an expert. I am a tour guide.
Yes.
And so if you think that your illness is going to cause you pain and grief, guess what?
It will.
It's probably going to cost you a whole lot more pain and grief than normal.
Yes.
So this is not to judge your pain and grief, because what you feel is what you feel. I accept that.
Yep.
But I always decided I was only going to have small amounts of pain and grief to remind me that I was mortal.
Okay.
But I was going to have less and less, and at one point I went 3 years with no symptoms, which mystified my medical experts. But having gone to see some mental health experts, because I believe in different points of view, because as I said to my doctor, if you don't think what I think impacts how I feel, then you're nothing but a well-intentioned glorified plumber. Didn't make any friends that day. And my mental health experts, aware of the research, because I said I won't see you as a mental health expert unless you're aware of this research. I don't need you to know it in detail, but
Right.
read the
But be
3
aware.
pages, please.
Yeah, yeah.
And they were like, oh no, Michael, if you think you're going to have a lot more pain than you're going to have, then you're going to have more pain, than well, physical or emotional.
Yeah.
So I went 3 years and had 0 physical pain and 0 symptoms, but under the microscope, oh,
Yeah, yeah.
scratching their head. I'll never forget the researcher from another country who was doing an extra doing their doctoral in Ontario saying, you're really sick, but no symptoms. I said, well, I'm practicing the following things mentally,
Yep.
and because I know it's not a cure, it's helping me manage my physical. Oh, well, that would have nothing to do with it. I said, well, then you're the wrong person for me to talk to, because you're just another plumber.
Exactly. Exactly.
And so our beliefs become our lives.
Yes, they do.
So,
Yes, and there were 2 other very key things that came along as part of that too. One of them was the 4 agreements.
oh,
So I discovered the 4 agreements at the time that I discovered yoga and meditation, which I continue to practice daily, as well as applying the 4 agreements. And the other one that I practice on a daily basis is my rule of happiness.
so happiness.
Happiness. Happiness. The only person who can make you happy is yourself. And the only time you can make yourself happy is right now. Okay? Yesterday's been and gone. Nothing you can do about it. Tomorrow is a prediction at best.
Mm-hmm.
We can set a direction, an intent, and that's a good thing.
Yes.
But don't invest too much in the outcome, because the chances are that life is going to throw you a curveball. And you might head in that rough direction, but it's unlikely that it's actually going to come to fruition in the way you imagined it. And don't compare whether it's better or worse. It just is.
Mm-hmm.
So mindfulness is absolutely key.
Oh, totally agree. For me, the discoverer of mindfulness,
Mm-hmm.
that's about being in the moment with no judgment. If I started judging the earrings, were they appropriate for the outfit? I'm not talking to Michelle anymore. I'm making a judgment. Or if I'm just getting caught up on the, wow, what a great pattern on the dress, I'm not talking to Michelle. So in the moment, without judgment, for us towards ourselves
Yep.
as well. Now that doesn't mean we shouldn't pay attention,
No.
but it means that, oh, I'm here.
That's right.
Oh, I'm having the gift of time with Michelle.
Yes.
Oh, I'm learning and reaffirming things I know. Oh, this is great. But if I judge Michelle, she's too tall, she's too this, I've lost the potential of a connection and a friend, a potential professional associate, all these things get lost when we judge, unless it's a safety issue. If it's a safety issue, that's a little different story, but that's not what we're talking about.
No.
So, mindfulness, I've heard you talk about but not mention it, framing and reframing. Does the issue have you, or do you have the issue? And along the way, you started to frame and reframe things in a different way.
Completely.
And so that's a very powerful skill set. It takes courage to do, but obviously Michelle has practiced it very thoroughly. So I really admire, because it's a skill that I don't see openly talked about.
You know, and I got there in an interesting way. And I got there because I needed to find self-acceptance.
Yes.
So all of my life, I've endured self-hatred. And that self-hatred came from self-judgment, okay, of how I felt about myself and my incongruity. So here I am experiencing this conflict, this inner conflict between my sense of self, my sense of identity, my true essence,
Yes.
and who I was and who I needed to appear to be in order to be accepted in society. So that in itself, as I said earlier, internalized, but it internalized into ultimately self-hatred. So within that first 3 years of trying to find a cure, I also needed to be on this path of release the judgment and the hatred. Can I get to a point where I can accept myself simply for being me?
Who knew it's possible, but it is.
Right, it absolutely is, and it's possible for everyone to do that.
Because it's one of the biggest issues I see for people not being as resilient as they deserve to be.
Yes.
Not self-acceptance, whether
Yes.
it's illness, gender issues, all the
Whatever
issues.
it is.
Lack of income. One of my friends used to be a senior VP and made the 6-figure stratospheric income. Had a new company car every 2 years, owned a 30-odd foot boat, gets laid off, and suddenly for 6 years only gets a couple days a month in work. Mad, down on himself. I said, you're still the same guy.
Yeah.
Your income's changed. So is it annoying and scary? Yeah, okay. But you're still the same guy. You're still handsome. You're still lovable. You're just not making the big bucks anymore. Well, welcome to the world in a new way. There's a whole bunch of people in other countries would love to live here with our health care. And oh, you still have a spouse that loves you. You have a roof over your head. You got grandkids. Like, life is pretty amazing. Except this category is annoying. Scary, too. You won't be able to buy a new boat anymore. Oh, how many people own 30-foot, 40-foot boats and can afford docking fees alone? So framing and reframing for you, to me, has been one of the major skill sets you used as a turning point for self-acceptance.
Well, it was, and it was that turning point when I actually reached the point of when I gave up looking for a cure at that point, and things changed, and I decided that what I needed to do now was to turn this whole thing around, and I needed to start on that path, and it is a path, it's a journey of self-acceptance, ultimately leading to self-love, and I'm kind of not quite there yet, I don't think.
So you're not perfect either?
Actually I am, right? I'm perfectly me.
Ah, nicely said.
Right?
Yes.
Just as you are perfectly you.
And I can't be you and you can't be me.
Exactly.
Dr. Bernie Siegel, an author who's written several really powerful books, look them up, they're a good read, talked about he was perfectly imperfect.
Yes,
And
that's
I
right.
thought, what a great way to say it.
No, and that's absolutely true. We're perfectly imperfect. And guess what? The other thing is, we change.
We evolve.
Right? And, you know, change is something that we as humans tend to resist. And yet the one constant in this world is change.
Yes.
Absolutely everything around us changes constantly. And yet we think we can resist, fight, offset change. Accept the change. And that's part of the mindfulness. Live in this moment, and you're not comparing it to the last moment or the next moment. You're just accepting it as is.
Yes.
Now change becomes irrelevant.
Yep.
Okay.
It takes away a lot of the power that
It does. It takes away the power.
It takes away the fear too. A lot of
Yes.
it. Still have some. It's okay to have some. It's just not nice to. But in the moment,
Healthy fear.
yes.
You know, fear.
Yes.
Fear can be healthy. All of our emotions can be healthy, but only when they're in balance.
Yes. Well, this is quite a journey.
It's quite the journey.
Well, I can't thank you enough for sharing. This has passed so fast. I think we should have Michelle back later. Part two.
Up to.
Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you
very
so much, Michael. I really enjoyed it.
Humbled and honored that you'd share a little piece of this big journey to date, and look forward to learning more as things unfold for you.
Good.
Thank
I'd love
you.
to. Thank you.
Till next time.